that you were invisible, and that started when you were a child. So can you discuss a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when I was little, we had a game like with my mum and dad, and it would just, when we'd walk to the train station, there were like a little grassy area, a wood, we called it the wood. And when I used to stand on the grassy area just next to the pavement, my dad would pretend it made me invisible, and he'd be like, "Where's she gone? She were in a minute ago." And I'd be like jumping around it on grass bit going, "I'm here," and he's like, "I can't see her, where's she gone?" And then when I'd step back onto the pavement, he'd like, "Oh, you're here." And that were a game that we played a lot. And I don't know if it developed from there, but I remember when I was young, so I tried to make myself invisible. I felt that I was safer, and I can remember when I just use the word little, when I was little, and I don't know what age, but I know my understanding was a very, very child, because I can remember I've mentioned before there were times when I were in bed praying to God and crying that, why am I alive? I don't want to be alive. I want to be a miscarriage. I didn't know what that meant, but I just knew if you were a miscarriage, you didn't exist anymore. And it were like, I want a disease. I just don't want to be here anymore. Can you make me poorly? And then I'd do that like a bargaining thing, like, well, if I have to be alive, I want to be invisible, and then nobody can see me. And then if I've got to be alive, I just want to get on with stuff and nobody bother with me and nobody come near me, or me not have to interact with anybody. And I want to be invisible, and just be able. That's if I've got to be alive. And I guess during my childhood and growing up, I tried to make myself invisible by being very silent, and like at school, I'm just thinking, like, I'd been there a few years, and a teacher asked me if I knew, because I did, I wouldn't join in anything, I wouldn't say anything, I was really, really quiet, and just going to school at the last minute, coming home at dinner time, going back for the lesson. And it was just, I tried to not exist, really.
And nobody took notice that you were there either?
No, I just got like, when I had school reports and my parents went, they'd just go, "She's really quiet, you don't know she's there," and that kind of thing. But I wanted to be invisible so that people didn't interact with me. So I think...
Did that work? I guess in that instance at school
yeah. And I think because I'd if people tried to interact with me, I'd make myself invisible. Like if a kid came to the door and knocked to see if I were like playing out or whatever, I used to hide in a cupboard, hide behind the door, hide under a pile of coats. I couldn't even just sit there and let the doorbell ring. I had to physically hide. I felt, I don't know, I just felt protected if I was under coats, in a cupboard, behind the sofa. I can remember when some people came round who knew my mum, and I hid under the kitchen table, but not under the kitchen table where I could be seen. On top of the chairs under the kitchen table were about that much, and I slid on the chairs under the table and hid there the whole time that
what makes you
they
think
came.
that no one could see you doing this hiding? That like your parents aware that you're going to go into a cupboard, or that you've disappeared somewhere?
Because I were left alone,
so
like
no
that.
one reacted to your
No, it would just, I'd get the, oh, you're rude, you're not nice, and why you're like that, and you know, and that kind of thing. I like to, when I played with my toys in the lounge, I'd play behind the sofa or behind the chair. It were like I didn't like playing on my own in my bedroom. It were like I wanted to play in the lounge where there were people around, but I didn't want people to see me.
Yeah.
So I played and did all my schoolwork and all my homework in the lounge, usually behind the settee or behind the chair, leaning against the radiator, burning my back. But I did, and I think it just went from there when I was, as I got older, and my OCD and exercise and anorexia and eating disorders voice came as an adult. I was because I was used to people ignoring me, but I put it as if I were invisible. I didn't see that people could see me doing what I was doing, like when I used to like walk for hours every day, like about 6 hours every day. I'd walk miles, and I didn't know people would notice that or something. I thought that I were invisible and I just were doing what I needed to do to get through. I didn't know that people could sort of see that, because
when we spoke about that and said how they probably can see you, then you had synchronistic events, didn't you, of people letting you know that they could see that you'd been walking and
yeah, and I found that quite weird, because I felt that
you
were invisible and nobody had noticed me. And I guess what I thought were me being invisible, which I thought were a good thing, but actually reflecting back on it, it was being ignored. And I thought I was being invisible, but actually my behaviours and what I was doing were like just being ignored, or comments made, but I was left to carry on. It wasn't there were no explanation around why I behaved like how I did.
That you've been, you were in danger because you were already being sexually abused.
And there were no explanation of why. As a young child, I suddenly stopped playing with people and stopped having friends. When my friends who I used to play with used to come round at the door, I'd be like, don't let them in, tell them I'm out, tell them I'm out, tell them I'm not here, and those kind of things.
But that equally was because you were so young. One of the friends were the danger, weren't they? Because they were a 16-year-old boy, and you thought in your mind that he was a child like you, and that was a game of him actually raping you over and over again. That was a friend who like I say, who you felt no longer safe with, and so the world became dangerous to you. Yes.
But I didn't put those two and two things together. I just knew that I were better off away from people. I felt better away from people. I didn't want people near me, and I felt that I was such a horrible person. I felt that I was protecting them from me as well, and it were like, don't make friends, or don't make me friends with people, because once they get to know me, they won't like me anyway. So I'm saving all that hassle.
Is that part of that what you, like you said, you were told you were a horrible person, and you're rude, and you're all these things. So you then started to believe, that this is your identity, this because you get trapped this way, and you get ignored anyway. That realization of people have actually seen me, they've just ignored me. So some of those things you might have felt were true anyway. That society had its own agenda and didn't take an interest in why is this child doing these things.
And I didn't like when I did interact with people, I didn't like the way I did. Like I said, I've mentioned in videos before, I were really aggressive towards my dad and stuff like that, and I didn't like that. It was just my response, and I hated being horrible to him, and I felt so bad about it, but I just didn't seem to stop it or have any power over it. So I felt that was me, because I didn't feel I didn't feel as if I was choosing to be like that. It just, that rage came out of nowhere to like hit him or kick him or shout at him and stuff. So I thought that was the true me, and that I had to hide from people, and that I had to protect from people.
But as well, you know, if you'd said that his dad's response to that was, she can't help it, because mum would say, give her a crack. And then dad would say, no, she can't help it. So if somebody responds like that you can't help it, you think, that's who I am, I'm this bad person, and this is what I do. Yeah, so did you, is that how you interpreted? That's who you, okay.
Yeah.
And so you then believe that you're a bad person, rather than all of these were reactions to being raped as a child.
Yeah. I just thought, what happened when I was little, I put that out of my mind, because I had enough trouble getting through the day being who I was and dealing with who I was. I had enough on my plate, so to speak, so I didn't think there were any connection with what had happened. I just put it away, and I had enough to deal with just being who I was and getting through the day and that kind of thing, really.
So when your dad said to you, she can't help it, do you think that was because, in the nicest of way, his ignorance, because he might have been taught that, you know, we're the way that we are, or you know, because of this chattering voice, that we can't help it. And so instead of investigating it, it's, oh, that's just who they are.
Yeah.
Because we're being told who we are. So because dad would have been programmed with something as well, and mum, that they didn't investigate, because they just believed that's how you are. That's how human beings are. Yeah, in that ignorance, in that.
And I think as well, he didn't want to think bad of me.
Yeah.
He always thought good of me. My dad, you know, I could never do out wrong or out like that. So he didn't want to say that I was doing out wrong or whatever. It was just, oh, she can't help it. It's just part of her, and I'd rather she do it to me than anybody else.
And then instead of, you know, that investigation of, why is she, there's no questions asked, is there? It's like, you know, as you've said before, when you went to the doctors, the medical people were gods. You had to get dressed up to go there, you had to, you know, make sure you were clean and tidy, and you went, and then you kind of went on their every word and every whim, not realising that they had egos as well that were playing out. So when they were abusive and said abusive things to you, that's not part of training, is it, really, to be a medical person? It's part of the ego that they would have brought from their upbringing, because that's what everybody does. So you're not only going to get the medicine that they've trained for, you're also going to get the ego and all the crap they might have brought with them, as well as the good stuff they might have brought with them. And so that's what you experienced as well, is the full shebang, really.
And it's when I reflect now, I think, like, looking back to when I was a child, what were put down as being awkward and rude and not nice or a problem, what start of OCD behaviours and liking things in a certain way and not liking spontaneity and unpredictability. My hair had to be in a certain way, and I'd met my mum do it over and over because my pigtails one was slightly higher than the other one, and it's like, I can't do it again. And I was seen as awkward and finicky and all this kind of thing, but it was, I had to do things in a certain way, or even now, obviously, it wasn't seen as an issue then, but when I reflect now, I ate certain foods all the time and would only eat certain things in a certain way, and I couldn't eat with other people because I didn't like people eating and the noise. I had my meals in front of the telly, with the telly on, blocking out noise on my own.
And part of these are rituals that are safety ones, aren't they? So, you know, when say like somebody's in a lot of noise, they can be hit with something unexpectedly, and so for you, it's like you want to be safe. You want to hear anything that's coming. You want to hear those footsteps that are coming towards you, and you know, so certain noises, such as you said, eating and how you described that before, of some of these noises would have been noises that you heard in the sexual act as well, or the rape towards you, and that would have been triggering for you as well.
I just liked noise, even throughout my whole studying and GCSEs and everything. I had to have the telly on, and I was studying in front. I couldn't do with silence.
Yeah.
I didn't like silence.
But equally, it's that in the silence as well, there were certain noises that you didn't like as well. So it's that thing around, you know, around noise, where it'd be either too much, or you needed it to block things out, or you needed it to hear things. You'd hear certain things.
Yeah. And if I heard a certain noise, or like even like my dad having a drink of tea or something like that, I could be very calm just watching telly and then just flip and go berserk, and want to like launch at him and hit him and just tell him to stop. And a lot of these things I've progressed into adulthood and developed into things that when I was little were seen as awkward, not nice, rude, and those, but they've been given different labels now, like OCD or self-harm, or I can't even remember that the one about noises that you can't, that's got a name as well, and stuff like that I'm still experience them, but they've got a different name now, instead of being awkward or, you know, annoying because I'm having my hair done for the fourth time because my pigtails aren't in right order and my mum's getting really frustrated with me. Now it's stuff about having stuff done in a certain order and meticulous and anxiety and all those kind of things.
Yeah, because anything out that veers out, you'd already been shocked. You're already going along in your little life, you know, happily developing, and then all of a sudden somebody shocks you with something. So when you think about that kind of thing as well, so it happens a lot in society, you know, like I said, sometimes we might normalise certain things that in society that can be a shock to a child. So for instance, you know, when I mentioned school and things like that, so the reason why I mention that a lot is because of these things that have been started off somewhere, whether it be as for you is being, you know, raped as a young child, and you know, the things that you were taught about who you were as well by those around you growing up. Also then society plays another role in that. So as I say, the cult in the culture, what happens is that, as I've said before, we're told who we are, we're not asked who we are. So imagine you're a child bobbing along as you were, and all of a sudden somebody comes and rapes you, and then a child that's bobbing along nicely, and all of a sudden they get picked up and taken to a strange building with lots of strange people and dropped off there. Do you see what I mean? For adults that can be quite difficult, but imagine what, you know, as that would have happened to you, and we call this school.
Oh, I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to school every single day. It was like you're sending to me a place with a bunch of strange people who I don't know who they are or what they're going to do to me or anything.
Exactly.
I felt safe with my mum well, normally with my mum or my grandma or my dad, I wanted to be with one of those three all time.
Yeah.
And I can remember primary school being dragged from my mum kicking and screaming because it's like, you've got to come into school, and my mum leaving me, but I just didn't feel safe.
Exactly. So
but then knowing the right from wrong, it were like when my mum would say, she'd get fed up with me so much pushing about not wanting to go to school and crying and screaming, and then she'd go, don't go tomorrow then. Be like, oh no, I can't do that, because I was programmed that it was wrong not to go, and I've got to go. And it were like, oh no. And it were like, it mustn't have made sense to her either that I was making such a fuss. And then when she were giving me out, I was going, oh no, I can't, I've got to go to school.
And that's the oddest thing, is that, you know, because we're programmed with it, and even parents are programmed with it, then this is how society works in this cult. This is what we do. And, you know, when people say, well, I won't be in a cult, it's like, you are already in one, because, you know, then the school, then the parents do what the school want as well. So when your parents go to school and say, no, we're going to change the time of the children coming to school, so you're going to have to change your life around whatever we say, or there'll be a consequence. And that's what happens in cults. If you don't do as you're told, there'll be a consequence. And that's what happens in this one, is the fact that we don't have freedom, you know, there's a consequence. And so we're already kind of born into it, and then we have to try and manage ourselves. So when people say you've got freedom, it's like, not in this, you haven't. And then some people say, well, what would I do if I don't send my children to school? Because it's all orchestrated. You know, you're going to be a worker, so you're going to send it, you know, as they used to do, to send the children to in the workhouse to these factory machines, and then the people that own the workhouse, they were like the prison guards, and that's exactly the same. And so, but people don't see that. It's like, oh well, we have to lock the doors and lock things for their safety, and teenagers even, you know, sometimes they're locked in, and they're not allowed out as much as they used to be. And it's like, just like a prison, you got to get the food that they give you, you have to wear a uniform that they give you, you have to do all these things. So from a very young age, your freedom gets taken away, and your rights, and it's like you barely have any rights. So you have to go, you're forced to go. And if you've already gone through a trauma like you, because that's a trauma in itself, that you're just going along your life, and somebody, even for an adult, if you picked an adult up and said, right, now I'm just going to pick you up and move you over to that country, and you're not going to understand the language, and they've got problems, deal with it, now go there. You know, that's going to be stressful for anybody, but yet we do this to our children because it was done to us, and we believe that's how it goes. So for you, it's that stress that you already had at home. You weren't safe at home, and now you've got to try and survive, you know, with all these strangers, and your way to surviving that was to be invisible. And then that carried on into adulthood. You learn in society the way to survive is to be invisible. Right, okay.
Yeah, and it just, I can remember being at university, and wasn't when my problems first started, but I went to a tutor. My tutor had been in there 18 months, and it was the same tutor, and I went and had a word with them because I felt that I was failing, and it were like, oh right, yeah, I've never spoke to you before, have I? And it's like, you've been my tutor for 18 months. And I can remember that, and it's like, oh well, actually we're changing tutor groups now, so you're getting another one anyway, go see them instead. And so yeah, I think I was treated invisible as an adult as well, and I went along with that and allowed that to happen.
Because you wanted that to happen as well. So
yeah,
you played into a society that actually we are invisible to society, to it all anyway. Where, you know, as I've said before, it's all about ego chatter, that it makes stories up. It's the one that
being so compliant made that easier to be invisible as well.
Yeah, because if you're compliant to everybody, then you're deemed as good. Because you're being compliant in this cult.
Yeah, and nobody notices you if you're doing everything right. Nobody notices you.
But if you go against the grain a little bit, then it's it becomes if you name it, or if you go against it, or if you question it or anything like that, then that's when.
Yeah, and I'd do anything to stop myself being visible, so I'd be on time everywhere. That's where my panic for being late is, because I wouldn't want to be late, because if I were late then people had noticed me, and getting things done in time and meeting all deadlines in any work or school or anything. I'd do it in ways so that I could be invisible.
Even being late, even that we invented time and that's a stressor. So a time when you're young, it's like it becomes a massive thing, doesn't it, for a time? Don't be late, you can't be late, because there's going to be a consequence. And then when you go to school, then, sometimes, not all the time, not every teacher, but, sometimes you can hear them say to the child, why are you late? And it's quite a passive-aggressive thing towards a child, because the parent stood there while they're asking the child, why are you late? And that's passive-aggressive, because the child's late because the parent is the adult. So, but what we do is we lay everything at the poor child's doorstep. And the child's being forced to, why wouldn't it be late? It's being forced to go to somewhere where he never chose to go to anyway. But we have no levels of understanding. There's no levels of understanding for that until you get older, or until, if somebody else has an understanding and says, why are you, are we complaining that you're taking a bit of your free will instead of, well, you shouldn't be late, so there's going to be consequences, because you're here to do what we tell you to do, and that's why it's a prison, because you're going to do what we tell you to do, and if you don't, you'll suffer a consequence. You're not going to do what you want to do, you'll suffer a consequence for that, and that bit, I remember hearing a teacher say it was out loud as well, as they were giving awards out in a schoolyard, and they looked up to this teacher, the other teachers. He was a really good teacher because he could get the children to comply with what he wanted, and because he wanted them to do something, we were very upset by that. And they said, and every time he did the announcement and announced the name, he never said it about the boys, he just said, and she only cried a little bit. And I was horrified to hear this thing, so I had to leave. And it was like, a child shouldn't have to cry at all, but they only cried a little bit until they stopped crying, because they still had to do, whatever it was that they wanted them to do. I can't remember what it was, but it was, and everybody sat there as if it was normalised. It's like, it made me question where savages came from. That word, how cultures deem it in other cultures. And I'm not saying that's what they were, because they were programmed with that as well. As we program, we pass it on, don't we, to each other. But for you, when you look at your programming and when you think about where you are now, that you're not invisible, because we do videos that you want to do, and what does that feel like to say people can actually see me, and I know that they can see me?
I think that's what I don't fully understand, because part of me thinks, there's part of me that thinks I'm not invisible, and there's part of me thinks that even by doing these videos I can still do it and be invisible. There's a real conflict inside me sometimes about, like, wanting what's inside me to stand on top of a tall building and just scream it out, but I don't want people to know. So there's a real conflict.
What don't you want them to know?
I don't know. I guess it's weird. I can be. I'm okay doing these videos, and I'm okay that if whoever sees them finds them helpful in understanding what it might be like for somebody who's had similar experiences to me and stuff. And I'm okay being visible to them, but to people who I know, I still want to be invisible.
Yeah. I guess part of that as well is that, you know, the other thing that we're told is just be quiet and not say anything. If you don't go against, you know, when somebody says, this is quite a bone of contention for me, really, when somebody says, I'm just saying what everybody else is thinking. And that's gaslighting, because nobody else might be thinking that at all, but then we'll just go along with it. So, for instance, there are many instances, you know, if there's somebody famous, this is deemed the most, you know, good-looking person, or that all women find this person good-looking. It's like, how do you know if you asked every single woman on the planet? Or, you know, say, for instance, with the royal family, they're now voicing their different opinions, but at one time you wouldn't have even voiced it, you would have been quiet. Such in the pandemic, as you said before, you feared not banging the pan, but you didn't want to, but were like, don't tell anybody, because you can't go against what the wider group is doing. You know, if one decides this, then this is what we all do. You don't have your own opinion on that. You know, because they deem that all opinions should be agreed to theirs, and so it's like that, you know, and so part of this is about showing a different opinion, is about having not always being afraid to be able to be who you are, and be able to say, you know, the mainstream in this is about in the ego is about tick boxes, and it has to be this way. Like your illness, you have to tick these boxes, you have to have this label, it has to be like this. And it used to be sometimes with people with depression, quite often, they wouldn't tick the tick box. So, well, you don't match what I've deemed as depression, and you won't match my tick box, because this is a pattern of what I see. But you might see somebody totally different, you know, like, for instance, I used to see people that were very well dressed and that had depression, because they learnt to hide things, and because they had to hide it. They weren't allowed to put a smile on your face, no one wants to see you like that. And so then that's what they had to do, because they didn't want, or they wanted to be invisible about their depression, as you did, so they would hide it in certain ways.
But then sometimes that compliance and stuff, because it doesn't fit the criteria, like I've said before, when I were in hospital, because I was so compliant, I followed all the rules of the refeeding programme, whereas other people in there, everybody were refusing, not compliant, struggling with going from not eating anything to after following this regime of eating so much and stuff. And I just went in and did as I was told, and they couldn't understand that. And I was told by the consultant, I just wish you'd fucking rebel, because my compliance wasn't expected.
Did you ever wonder what he wished that you'd do that for? Because those that rebelled were punished.
Yeah.
So then why would you?
I think in lots of situations, because we are based on giving labels and meeting that criteria to get that label, that people don't expect there to be deviations from that criteria. Or I know I've been to another clinic for help with my chronic fatigue, and she said, we can't help you because of your mental health issues, because you won't comply with us. And it was an assumption that because I had mental health difficulties, I would be challenging, I wouldn't take the advice that they were given and all that kind of stuff. So I was sort of like discharged for them without even any consideration that I was an individual, just because we're looking at the label that you've got and the assumptions that we put with that label and stuff. So
and the fact of having an individual body as well is that, you know, for you, it doesn't go against or go with the tick box of what that means, because, you know, because of what's going on for you, and it becomes a lot, doesn't it, about these tick boxes that, well, you're not ill because you can do this or you can do that, and it's like that. Well, it's like, well, you do that because your brain tells you to, the chattering voice, the ego of, you know, as I've spoke about before, and it can sound quite offensive the way that I say it, I guess, to some, because I'll say it just chatters, she said this, he said that, because it's a recording, but it's actually not you. It's a recording of you know, the things it's picked up in your environment. So it just chatters, it judges, it criticises, does all those things, because all those things are in the environment, and so because it does all that, it comes out of, you know, when I say the shit in the bag, it kind of comes out of its bag, doesn't it? Whatever's in it, it comes out.
But that's an accurate representation of what it's like in my head. I didn't know it was the ego until a lot of learning and understanding, but ever since I was little, I've had the voice in my head that is going 10 to dozen like that, going, well, you can't eat that, how many calories in that? Well, that's got 97 in, so if you have an apple, that's 50. Well, what if apple's bigger? You should have weighed the apple. Okay, I have the apple, so I've had 154 today, so how many calories have I burnt? Well, I haven't been for a walk. And this, and oh, look, a tree, and oh, look, I just banged into a post. Oh, right, and I'm in my head all this time like that, 24/7. I don't notice what's around me. I did it wasn't going other day, I walked splat bang into a lamppost that I didn't see.
Because you're so much.
Because I was so much in my head.
It's because that's called a daydream state, and the majority of people.
But it's that voice that it is all the time.
That's why I, you know, it's quite a derogatory voice, and that's why I speak about it in that way, because it's a cruelty.
Oh, it is. You're awful. You are. You're useless. You are. Well, you're going to fail that. Well, that's disaster, isn't it? That's awful, isn't it? Well, you've eaten too many calories today. You've failed, haven't you?
It's not even talking to you.
No.
It's not talking to you. It's not talking about you. It's a recording of the experiences and the things that have been said to you. So it's actually the aid of Freud made, the aid, the ego, and the super ego, and they're all playing out in your head together. Are they you? They're absolutely nothing to do with you. You've been dropped on this planet. You've experienced all this madness on this planet. It's been recorded in your mind, and then you think it's your identity, because really nobody is actually, you know, apart from Buddhism and things like, being interested in human beings, being more interested in what we can get them to do, not what they can be or what they actually are. It's about what we can get them to do. So that's why illness is getting worse, and you know, not only the mental illness is getting worse, but the physical illness is getting worse, because what we're doing isn't right. But as Freud said, you have to see the madness to see your way out of it. And you think, well, if you look around in society and say, why is society getting sicker? It's like, look at what we're doing. Look at what you're eating. Look at what you're watching. Look at what you're talking about, your ego's talking about. Look at what it's listening to. Look at that. It buries you from who you really are. And that's what's been going on for you. So people are in the daydream state because they're in the head. Or if I do this, it'll make me look good. If I do that, I need to be the same as that. If I have that label, it'll make me look like this. If I have this label, I can use that as an excuse. If I can do that, I can get validated. It's all these things that's going on in the ego. But it's like, well, you know, and it doesn't matter who you are. When we're born, we have the ego. So it's that, is that there isn't anyone on the planet to look up to. The only person you need to look up to is yourself, but the real self and not the ego self. So it's then listening to your body, because when you've listened to what other people have said, they've got it wrong, and that's why we become ill, because no one can tell you what the inside of your body feels like but you. So it's where you have to listen to yourself, but you can't listen because you can't hear yourself because of the chattering voice, what's being